And now continuing this conversation is ABaohua He, the Global Technical Service Director at Astronergy, who's been in the industry, the solar industry, since 2010. ABaohua brings a technical understanding of product development to our Roundtables Europe session. Welcome to Roundtables 2023, ABaohua, and please begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you. And I'm ABaohua from Astronergy, and today I will share our sustainability strategy. So, okay, here's a presentation. So, Astronergy's commitment to a green world. So, before the introduction, I'll give a brief introduction about Astronergy as a top 6 PV module suppliers. Last year, our total revenue is $3 billion. And our shipment volume and our capacity expansion increase ratio is year-over-year is our. Okay, here's our global presence. As you can see that we already shipped 60 gigawatt PV modules to more than 140 countries over the world, and our main manufacturing based in China. Okay. So sorry. Okay. So our TOPCon capacity ratio this year is 43 gigawatts for TOPCon, and total PV modules is 55 gigawatts. And in next 2 years, our total capacity will reach to 100 gigawatts. And as you can see that the advanced technology like the TOPCon, our capacity ratio is 80%, rather than compared to the industry is only 50 and less than 60% in next 2 years. And by 2025, our TOPCon ratio is up to 90%. Yeah, our brand strategy combined with the customer demands, like we will provide the green and low carbon product, high quality, high reliability, and the stable development and the social responsibility to meet the compliance to build our greener world. So I want to focus on the sustainability development from 6 aspects. Firstly, we established the first level organization, ESG office, and we are building our zero carbon factories. And the third one, we are set up our overseas production world, and we are building our traceability and social accountability and like anti-bribery management system. And all of this we are focused on the next, like the green supply chain to produce our green product. Okay, let's see the first point. So we have a very clear ESG strategy. Like this year, we already got our ESG report, and we got our first zero carbon factory certification. And in the next 5 years, we will have like at least 8 zero carbon factories, and through many different ways, we will reach our zero carbon neutrality by 2050. Give some introduction about the first zero carbon factory. So through different ways, like through the rooftop power station, PV carport, PV street light, and the saving lighting system, combined with the water saving fixtures, green building materials, green energy certificate, energy and carbon emission intelligent management system. So we got our first zero carbon factory certification that's certified by the TÜV in this year. And in next year, we will build another at least 3 zero carbon factories next year. And in next 5 years, as I said, we will reach at least 8 zero carbon factories. And as the stable development have a plan to set our capacity over the world. As you can see that we already have our Thailand factories, and we are building our like the American 2 gigawatt PV modules, and the Turkey 500 megawatt PV modules, and Saudi Arabia 50,000 tons silicon, and we are evaluating to build our 2 gigawatt modules in Brazil, in 2 gigawatt PV modules in Europe, and 1 gigawatt modules in Brazil. So this is for a very good sustainable development of this company. And we got some sustainability achievement, like we got the EcoVadis, the silver rating, ranked as silver, and we also joined the STS program, traceability management system audit, and the B level. So this is the highest level that, as I know, for all the PV industry. And we also got the SAA Sound Social Accountability Certificate, and we are building our anti-bribery management system, ISO 37001. So that will be available in the next couple of months. And we also focus on our green supply chain management and the development, from the product, from the raw material to the end life, total lifetime. So we will have a very clear and a very clear strategy to management the product to achieve the low carbon footprint value product. So here's our current certificate that we got for our product, like the EPD UL and the EPD Italy and French ES. So and also 14067, and the other EPD are also in progress, like in other countries, and we also joined the Science-Based Targets Initiative program. So this will help us to better development the low carbon footprint values products. So all this task is for us to achieve the lower carbon footprint values to build a greener world and sustainable world. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ABaohua He, the Global Technical Service Director at Astronergy. We have a little bit of time left, ABaohua. Are you happy to answer a quick question or two from me?
Okay.
Excellent. Well, I saw that you have the zero carbon factory certification from TÜV Rheinland for one, and then plans to build more zero carbon factories. What then is the key in terms of decarbonizing solar production? Which factor for Astronergy has been key? How have you achieved this?
Yeah, so that's a good question for Astronergy. So I think use renewable electricity is the key point to build the zero carbon factories. As Astronergy, as I mentioned, that we built the PV plant on the rooftop, and we have the PV carport, and besides this, we have the energy saving systems, and combined with we will buy some green electricities. So combine all these factors, we can build the zero carbon factories. And so you know that there's the different levels of zero carbon footprint certificate. So next year we will reach the highest level, and even the net zero emission for the whole factory.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for shedding some more light on that. You also set out the international footprint of your production, some of which are planned, some are factories that are already in operation. What's the primary motivating factor, or how big a role does zero carbon or low carbon production play in localizing manufacturing closer to key markets?
Yeah, so for different markets, there's different demands. Let's take France market, for example. So there's a ECS certificate. So currently, our carbon footprint value is lower than 420 kilogram per kilowatt hour. So as for the other market, I think but anyway, so our we have the primary motivation to achieve the very low carbon footprint value to provide to our customers. So I think certificate is not the key point. So the key point is we can provide the lowest carbon footprint value. So that's our target.
Okay, so it's not so much collecting the certificates, but you did show in your presentation you have collected a very large number of those around the world. It really is the headline goal is just low carbon production as possible.
Yes.
Excellent. ABaohua, the Global Technical Service Director at Astronergy, thank you very much for your presentation today and for answering a few questions from me. Welcome to Roundtables Europe 2023, and thank you for speaking.
Okay, thank you.
Well, continuing on with our low carbon session right now, the cost reduction and performance enhancement, that was kind of the key message, the key drive, the key focus of the solar industry just through its early chapters of evolution. And the question is now the time to shift some of that energy, some of that attention to low emission production? Let's now speak to three women to try and address this key question. All three are leading clean energy experts and have a broad view of the solar industry, including the low carbon push and where it makes sense and perhaps where it doesn't. Welcome to Roundtables Europe. Jenny Chase, solar analyst with BloombergNEF, Patty Dillon, VP Criteria and Category Development with the Global Electronics Council, and Edurne Zoco, the Executive Director, Clean Energy Technology with S&P Global. Welcome to the three of you, and thanks for making the time for us today.
Thank you,
Hello, Jonathan.
Okay, Edurne, first question is to you. Where do you see in the solar supply chain the greatest opportunity for carbon emission reduction and reducing that embedded carbon in solar module production?
Well, first, thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation to this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. I would say there are two big types of opportunities. The first one was already discussed today around, the power sector and grid decarbonization. Around 90% of all CO2 emissions in the PV supply chain come from electricity consumption, and most of this energy consumption is in upstream nodes, mostly polysilicon. So if 90% of the emissions come from electricity, we can say that this is not a hard-to-abate sector, right? It only requires cleaner or lower carbon grids with more renewables, hydropower plants, and less coal and gas. So this is the very first big opportunity to decarbonize. The second one is also around technology evolution and material. And I have to say that the industry has already done a lot in this area. The industry consumes much less materials than 10 years ago and generates much higher output modules. So every year, modules are more efficient with longer lifetimes. There has been an amazing reduction in material consumption for polysilicon, glass. And then we are seeing an increased use of alternative materials with lower carbon footprint. This is not only relevant for modules, but also very relevant in the case of trackers, mountain structures with more green steel coming online. So I will say that's the two biggest opportunities: technology and material consumption, as well as lower carbon grids.
Now, Edurne, just a quick follow-up. Would you say that these carbon reduction carbon emissions reductions that have been achieved, is this like intentional? Was this deliberate, or is this just a byproduct of kind of reducing costs and getting better at making stuff?
Well, of course, I mean, like the industry in the early years, it was mostly focused around cost, right? It was very mandatory for the solar industry to reduce costs in order to be competitive. But then, as part of this cost reduction focus, there has been very indirect effects regarding carbon footprint and reduction of material. So I will say it was not the primary objective, at least in the first year, but it's definitely now becoming a priority.
Okay, thank you, Edurne. Jenny Chase from BloombergNEF. Where would you say some of the biggest carbon emissions reductions have been achieved in solar historically, looking back over the last decade or so?
Well, when my clients asked me whether they should buy low carbon modules, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit and I say, look, bear in mind that almost certainly all solar is pretty low carbon, and it's almost certainly better than what it's replacing. So the best solar is the stuff that gets built, not necessarily spending a lot of time on the carbon footprint side. On the other hand, the efforts to reduce cost, just as Edurne said, really have driven down the carbon footprint of modules as well. So the typical module in 2012 was a multi-crystalline silicon module that was 15.4% efficient and probably used around 8 to 10 grams of polysilicon per watt. And the typical module this year is probably still a monoperk, about over 21% efficient and using about 2.6 grams per watt. So that's like just a fourth of the material that we were using 10, 15 years ago. And that makes a really big difference to carbon footprint, probably more of a difference compared with the relatively fractional things that are being measured by certification.
And how is the solar module today using so much less polysilicon? How was that achieved?
Thinner wafers, better recipes for silver pastes, better, hundreds and thousands of engineers making every little bit of making modules better, cheaper, use less materials.
Okay, better, cheaper, and greener, it seems. Patty Dillon from the Global Electronics Council. In terms of certification, I know that the GEC is introducing or has introduced a eco-label for the solar industry and solar modules. How do you assess embedded carbon then? What is the process there?
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. GEC, we introduced our eco-label covering solar panels several years ago. And most recently, actually, starting early next year, it will include low carbon solar performance criteria. And so what we actually do is we establish a maximum carbon emission for a solar panel based on kilowatt peak power output of the module, similar to what our industry guests were talking about. We actually worked extensively with the solar supply chain and numerous experts in the industry to set these thresholds. They were based on the extensive data from the International Energy Agency and their PV Task 12 task force. And we set two emissions thresholds. The first we call low carbon solar. It's about 20% lower carbon emissions than the global market average for module production. And that's set at 630 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt peak power output. And the second threshold level, which we call ultra low carbon, is really the best in class. And that's set at 400 kilograms. And so, for example, the module that was discussed by Astronergy, for example, would meet that specification. So in addition to setting the maximum carbon emission thresholds, what our criteria also do is outline the methodology that must be used to calculate what we call the verified carbon footprint. It accounts for carbon emissions throughout the module value chain, from raw material extraction and processing through cell and module production. And it uses standardized life cycle assessment methodologies. And then our methodology also requires a verification of data inputs down to the factory level and several layers of independent critical review of the life cycle assessment that's used to calculate the emissions.
Okay, so a really multifaceted approach to assessing kind of manufacturer claims. Edurne, you said earlier that really the key to low carbon solar manufacturing is the energy source. We are seeing somewhat of a realigning of parts of the solar manufacturing chain. Can you see I'm choosing my words carefully here? I'm not saying a total realignment, but we are seeing some changes, is what I'm saying. How much of that is driven by low carbon, or at least impacting on low carbon manufacturing?
Well, thanks very much, Jonathan, for asking this question. It's true that we are seeing lots of solar manufacturing being built outside China, but I'm not convinced the main driver, and I will be very glad to hear what Jenny and Patty want to say about this. The main driver has been to build capacity in lower carbon intensive regions. In our view, main drivers have been clearly policy and cost. So for instance, the biggest capacity outside of China is in Southeast Asia, and the main driver for these capacity expansions have been trade barriers in the US. So capacity grew in Southeast Asia to serve the US market because it was the most competitive region, not necessarily because it has the lower carbon intensity or has a lower carbon intensity grid. However, the IRA has promoted the growth of local manufacturing, and not only from the modules, but also from inverters and trackers, because the U.S. grid is less carbon intensive than other regions, according to S&P data, also according to IEA data. So this indirectly means lower carbon manufacturing for these components. And similarly, if there will be more capacity being built in Europe, because of Net Zero Industry Act or any other policy, this would indirectly also mean lower emissions for those components manufactured in Europe, just because the grid is less intensive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and even inside China, Jenny Chase, this one for you. We are seeing some moving kind of supply chains, particularly when it comes to polysilicon, which is a particularly energy-intensive part of the solar supply chain.
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, a thing happened in China. Xinjiang stopped having the cheapest electricity of any province, and therefore the new factories being set up for polysilicon were mostly in Sichuan and in Mongolia and Qinghai and Yunnan, most of which have some renewables already. Sichuan has a lot of hydro, for example, and that does mean that the average carbon intensity of solar polysilicon almost certainly did go down, although it's worth noting that was only the new expansion. There is still plenty of capacity in Xinjiang, which is largely coal-fired, and will be for the foreseeable future, because the Chinese market it's about 240 gigawatts out of about 413 gigawatts globally this year. So there is any kind of demand for lower carbon or non-Xinjiang production is really a sort of froth on top of the basic demand for your standard cheapest available modules.
A froth on the top, but not completely inconsequential, I would perhaps argue. Sometimes froth is good. What about the froth from a buyer perspective then? Edurne, over to you. What are buyers saying? Are buyers interested, willing to pay a premium, willing to check all those certifications to make module suppliers jump through those additional hoops for low carbon supply?
Well, I guess the answer depends on buyers. It depends on the country. It depends on the segment, as Adele before was mentioning about utility versus other segments. So it is already a key criteria for qualification for large investors and developers. But I wouldn't say it's the top priority for many yet. There has been a lot of priorities in the last few years. Well, first, cost. and then about things regarding to also other ESG parts, right? Like traceability of the supply chains and certificates of origin. But the main reason why low carbon modules have not been on top of, or components have been on top of every buyer's mind is because with some exceptions, and the French market is one of those, it has not been a key criteria to purchase. So as long as policy has not been a key driver, that's the reason why it hasn't been a priority for many buyers. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Okay, thank you for that. Patty Dillon from the Global Electronics Council. Now, your eco-label for solar is known by the acronym EPEAT. What was really the driver of the creation of that label? It's been a few years, I'm thinking 4 or 5 years when that was first introduced to the market. Where did the demand for the label come from?
Yeah, great, thanks. First of all, the EPEAT eco-label initiated around IT products, and it was actually heavily supported by the U.S. federal government and used in its purchasing recommendations and requirements actually for U.S. federal agencies. So we actually went into the solar space at the request of the solar industry, as well as some not-profits who wanted to standardize the criteria, the performance criteria, both at the product level and at the corporate level for companies in this space. So one of the things that's interesting when I was hearing our industry speakers talking about the various certifications and standards that they're using, it was interesting because what we actually do for the EPEAT eco-label is we actually bundle a number of different certifications and best practices regarding energy efficient manufacturing, to what's in the modules, to recycling, circularity, social performance, and as far as we heard a mention of SA 8000, which has to do with labor and worker health and safety in the industry. So what our eco-label does, in addition to recently adding these low carbon criteria, we actually bring together best practices across a number of areas to really create the easy button for a purchaser to basically say, wow, I really like all these different things, but I need to know that there's consistency and comparability across the various product offerings. And so that's actually what the EPEAT eco-label does. It brings a whole bundle of environmental sustainability performance requirements, including now low carbon solar, so that purchasers actually can compare products that have sustainability attributes.
Okay, well, and you mentioned in the IT space that the US government requires the EPEAT label for its purchasing, and that's been an important driver. Let's look at policy. Edurne has mentioned the French market. We saw some French certifications on our industry presentations as well. Do you see public policy as being an important driver, Patty, of the push for more low carbon certified solar manufacturing?
Absolutely. Because if nowadays we have all these goals around, for example, net zero, and governments as well as private sector are being held accountable for their various greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. And so it is actually a way for the not only the industry, but also public policy to put sort of their buying power behind their policies to actually drive change. And one of the things that we actually see is that even if you use the purchasing requirements, say, for example, of the U.S. federal government or others, there's a trickle-down effect in that, when we look at the IT space, for example, some of the innovations that happen because of sustainability requirements in the business sector actually trickle down to everybody and make efficiencies across the board. So it's not just, it's the power of the purchaser can actually drive change throughout the value chain.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, what's your take on policy then as a driver? There is France. Also, South Korea has some low carbon barriers for module suppliers in that marketplace.
That's the thing. You call them barriers. And I guess my worry is that low carbon measures are implemented by governments not as a way to decarbonize, but rather as a way to implement barriers and protect the domestic industry at the expense of the industry's actual growth. And I mean, I can't help noticing Trina's best factory, Adele said, was Yiwu, and that presumably is where they get the 400 grams of watt carbon footprint. But if I pay extra for the certified modules from Yiwu, surely the other modules from other factories just go to other places. So have I actually reduced global carbon emissions at all? I mean, it's fine. It's good that we have these things in place, but I wouldn't want them to become too widespread, because my main hope for the future is that solar becomes a very large, unstoppable industry, which it already has because of free trade.
And Edurne, where do you stand on that? Do you think there's dangers that we could be slowing down deployment by putting up barriers, if we call them that?
I don't know if it's low. I mean, I tend to agree with Jenny about her point about moving components or moving modules or other around. I think at this moment, the biggest issue is that you can be paying a much higher price for a module, for instance, in the US, with absolutely no guarantees that that module has a lower carbon footprint than others, right? So in that sense, the country that is leading policy and to bring manufacturing onshoring, to my understanding, hasn't done anything regarding incentivizing lower carbon footprint. So I tend to agree that there could be policy might need to be done in a better way. You want to be more effective in terms of like low carbon, then you can follow like the French system, or you can maybe facilitate easier or faster financing for those companies that are using low carbon or lower carbon products. I mean, there are ways to do that. The current policy is not aiming that primarily.
Okay, so there can be incentives rather than barriers, can perhaps come in. Jenny, let's do a bit of crystal ball then. Where are the next carbon reductions going to come from? Other than relocating factories, or not really relocating, building new generation factories where there's loads of hydro. We've seen the power of diamond wire in terms of thinner wafers. What are you excited about in terms of lower carbon manufacturing into the future? And lower carbon is often lower cost.
I'm quite excited about aluminium, probably because I don't know enough about aluminium. But the solar industry used about 2.8% of the world's aluminium supply last year. So things like making aluminium with electrolysis for using renewables is perfectly technically feasible, and that's hopefully something that will drive significant reductions in the carbon footprint of solar modules as well.
Yeah, okay. And, aluminium is an endlessly recyclable material, but its carbon footprint can be quite high when the electricity mix is quite carbon intensive. Is that right, Edurne, your understanding of the role of aluminium?
Yeah, aluminium is like far more energy intense than steel. So anything that has, anything that helps to have green steel or green aluminium, using hydrogen or any other low carbon gas is definitely the way to go. And I think some of the upcoming policies around CBAM actually aim to to tackle these hard to abate industries, which is very necessary not only for solar industry that we use a lot of aluminium and steel, but also for other industries like wind that are extensive users of steel as well as cement, that are two of the most polluting industries.
Okay, Well, we've addressed certifications both in the presentations today and also in our discussion here. Patty Dillon from the GEC, you've got your eco label, and honestly, seems to be you've been doing a lot of work in terms of putting in processes in place by which low carbon can be certified and purchasers can have confidence. What about this call from Trina Solar for more standardization in terms of the certification of low carbon? Because it's understandable when you see all those certifications, that's all cost that's being added at the end of the day. And you don't want to have too much duplication of things that you need to be going through. Do you see a role for the GEC in terms of driving a bit of standardization in the industry in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. What I had mentioned before was what we actually try to do for our eco label is to actually bundle best practices. And so one of the things that we actually have done is we also develop our criteria in a voluntary consensus process that involves policy, industry, standardization bodies, et cetera, to bring these performance requirements across a broad range of issues together. And so that's one of the things that we can actually do is recognize in performance criteria what are those best practices. And so then you have folks working towards the same best practices and evolving them over time. So that definitely. But the other thing I would actually just like to add about the opportunities for buying low carbon products is that, I think the energy mix is just one piece of the puzzle. And we've heard from our industry colleagues, as well as my fellow panelists, about some other opportunities. And so, we can be building renewable energy installments at manufacturing facilities. There are opportunities to, as we heard from Astronergy as well as Trina Solar, to do more energy efficient manufacturing. So that's also an opportunity. Material efficiency we heard, but also the future using recycled content materials. The IEA has some data out that we can actually, as we scale up our solar, we can actually be looking towards the recycling of modules and those materials and putting them back into solar production so that we can be saving on aluminum and glass and polysilicon, as well as silver. So those are all very different ways to start lowering the carbon footprint. Energy mix is obviously a big part of it, but it's not the only option for lowering the carbon footprint.
Okay, lots of opportunity there. I think that's an excellent place to leave our discussion. Thank you very much to our three panelists today, Jenny Chase from BloombergNEF, Patty Dillon from the Global Electronics Council, and Edurne Zoco from S&P Global. Thank you very much for joining Roundtables Europe 2023.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, I think we've seen it's a complicated landscape, low carbon solar manufacturing, but one that is ripe with opportunity for manufacturers, for our industry, and for participants right across the supply chain. It's a space that's also evolving quickly, as we heard in our technology session. Not only is technology moving fast, but so are things like low carbon manufacturing. Next up is session 5 of Roundtables Europe, which is called Tech and Finance, Enabling Solar, and it's moderated by Marion Willoom. I'm Jonathan Gifford, the editor-in-chief of PV Magazine Global. Thank you for joining this sustainability session of Roundtables EU 2023. There's a lot more to come.